Finally, we arrive at our final unicorn in the trilogy, the CLK GTR. At the end of 1996, Mercedes decided to leave DTM and enter the GT1 racing realm. And in just 128 days, they designed this car. It was an all-new carbon fibre Kevlar monocoque, mated to a 6-litre V12 engine that was lifted out of the SL600 and tuned to over 600 horsepower. Despite failing to homologate the car in time for the 1997 FIA GT Championship, they were still allowed to compete with the car, and it won 6 out of the 11 rounds and won the championship that year. For the 1998 season, it won the first 2 rounds, and then they converted to V8 power thereafter, winning every single round of the entire championship. And that effectively killed GT1. Such was the dominance of the CLK GTR in V8 form that all other major competitors withdrew from the series at the end of that year. And that was that. It was over. And hence, that's why we have so few of these cars to focus on, and only really 3 of the big ones. So looking back at the road car, they did in the end manage to build 25, but only 20 of them were coupes. Evidently, the demand for a £1.5 million supercar at the time just wasn't there, and it was, pro rata, the most expensive car ever available for sale. After that, they built 5 roadsters, plus one of the prototypes was converted to a roadster also. So there were 26 cars in total built in road specification. They all had this very novel and unique manually operated sequential gearbox, whereby you had a clutch pedal and you used paddles behind the steering wheel to change gear. The name CLK doesn't mean that there's very much CLK about this car though. You've got the original tail lights from the CLK road car, parts of the mirrors, the headlights, the badge, and some of the switchgear on the interior, including the design of the steering wheel, and then that's about it. But again, it was Mercedes saying, this is a CLK. When you see this car racing, we want you to think Mercedes CLK. But underneath, unlike the McLaren F1, which obviously was a McLaren F1, and the Porsche GT1, which was a 993 steel tub underneath it, this was out and out race car. The most ridiculous of them all, the most outrageous, and for many, the ultimate. And clearly, as we said, the one that killed the series. So race car was this road homologated special that even a team of guys was needed to lift off the rear clamshell. Like a race car, it takes 3 people to lift it off. Same for the front, it completely detaches and opens up. There's no boot to open, there's nothing like that. Although, in the door sills, you do have these little luggage carriers here with fitted luggage. Also, it even had air jacks. What use they are on a road car that doesn't even have a toolkit, I have no idea. But a seriously, seriously cool gimmick. So now it's time to take this one out for a drive. And just before we do that, let's think about the stats. Amazingly, this car weighed 1,440 kilos, the heaviest of the 3 by far, but it also had the most power. It was quoted at having around about 625 brake horsepower, but we've had this one on our rolling road, and it gave 670 brake horsepower. But now, time to get in, go for that drive. And so about that gearbox, the 2 things that people, as I said, always say about CLKs is 1, getting in and out is quite difficult. I think there's a bit of a technique. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. And secondly is the gearbox. You know, a lot of people are very quick to criticize it. But how does it work? Well, you've got these paddles here, and I've got 3 pedals. So you push the clutch pedal, you pull the right-hand paddle, and it selects first gear for you, and you pull away like a conventional manual car, pull the clutch, let the clutch up, and off you go. And then when it comes to changing gear, it's foot on the clutch, but instead of changing gear with your hand, you pull the lever and it slots the next gear, and off the clutch you come, and there you are in the next gear. It's quite straightforward, it's just a different way of doing it. It takes a bit of getting used to, but once you're used to it, it's actually quite an easy system to use. And at full speed, it does work quite well, but let's see for sure now. Easy as that going into second gear. You just drive it like a manual gearbox. So I've got my foot on the throttle, on the clutch, pull the lever, puts it in third, off the clutch, here we go. Sometimes you forget to come down the gearbox, that's my problem with it, but once you're used to it, I think it's a great system. And look, it's not as It's not as pure and it's not as original as the manual gearbox, but it is the unique point of this car, something that's everyone always talks about, and why not? But what's amazing about this is the torque. So back down into second, here we go. Really great traction. The F1 doing exactly the same would have spun it through wheels, but this is just planted. Naturally, it's got much wider section rear tyres. But even though it's a huge behemoth of a car, I feel comfortable driving it relatively quickly already. Sometimes you forget to heel and toe, so you're so used to a paddle shift gearbox just pulling the left, going down the gearbox, and you've got to blip it. The funny thing about this car as well is I've heard it from the outside, and it's not that noisy. It's got an amazing induction sound. Not quite like the F1, but still a great sound. But inside, there's so much noise. Obviously, you've got an engine bolted to the back of the tub here, and that's all you hear. And it's a huge experience. Well, it's a huge experience, but I'm sure outside it doesn't sound as incredible as it does in here. But who cares about everyone else? It's about us in the car. All right. So here we are at the mile straight. Let's put it through its paces. So solid, so planted. Not like the F1 where you come off and suddenly you feel it moving about. It just is planted. I could be doing 200 miles an hour. Who knows? Unlike the F1, there's no opportunity to be off in this car. I couldn't imagine spending a long time in this. I couldn't drive down to Monaco from London in it. But I could have a lot of fun just over a 15 or 20 kilometre blast. And it's much like an F40. You know, I don't get to use my cars much. And jumping in the F40 to do 15 or 20 kilometres, it's always a real blast. I get home, my ears hurt, I feel a bit sore from trying to get in and out of it, but I feel like I had a great time. And I think that's what this does. You know, it's a completely bonkers, ridiculous car on the road. But that's why I love it so much. So at the end of the day, what an experience. We all dream of seeing these three together, let alone getting to drive them back to back. Only a handful of people have ever done that. So truly grateful for being able to do that today. And I guess now everyone will want to know the answer to the question, which one's the best? Well, it's a bit of an unfair question because the F1 still has the Le Mans overall win. And I'm going to say something outrageous here, but let's not forget that it was the first car out of the three, the one that kick-started this GT1 arms race. And that year, the GT1 competition wasn't huge. I mean, the F40 GT was the closest car, which was by then a 7-year-old design, or an 8-year-old design, albeit an evolution of. And the conditions did favour the F1. So would it have done it again had there been a rematch or something similar? I'm not sure, but we do know it's the most valuable, and therefore there must be reason behind that. But I think what's important is to think about the differences and to explain how different I found each car. So I'll start with the F1. So the F1 is definitely the car that you jump in and you feel like you can drive it fast the most easily, and you want to extract the most out of it really quickly. And you almost push it to the limit sooner than you should do, and it alarms you sooner than you realise. And especially that thing that I've always found with F1s, from high speed, off the throttle, a little bit of brake pressure, i.e. not enough brake pressure, the rear end is so light on them, but that's part of the challenge. And once you know about it, it's something you can drive around. But the car has just such an amazing feel when you get into it. You feel so comfortable, the seat fits perfectly, everything's within arm's reach. it is the really super well thought out car. But that is what they set out to do when they designed that car. It was supposed to be the ultimate road car, and it's hardly surprising. And you know, at the end of the day, I didn't have a crash helmet on and I wasn't going to set a time. That brings me on to the GT1, because if you had asked me at the start of the day, up front, which one was my favourite, well, I could have said, I could probably tell you which one's my least favourite, and it's the GT1. And I think that's just because it's the one that I drove the soonest, in terms of I drove this very car back in 2007 approximately. And I remember being disappointed by it. But the difference today is that we've just done a full overhaul on this car, and it turns out that it was always running a bit low on power and it wasn't properly set up. So I was blown away by how much fun I had and how much I enjoyed driving the car fast. And the best bit about it's the gearbox. The gearbox is so direct, it's so precise, and it makes sense because it's come from a 13-season 962 basis. It's an all-synchro box, and it's absolutely, people use the phrase like a rifle bolt, but when you think about what a rifle bolt feels like, you can't go into the wrong place, and it's a very regimented action. And that's exactly what the GT1 is. When you go from second to third, you never think, I might get first, I might get fifth. You know you're getting third. And I just enjoyed going round and round and round in this car so much. I felt like it's the car that if I had to go around all day and set the fastest time and make the biggest improvement, and of course not damage the car, this is the one that I would choose, because it was just so good. And well, isn't that Porsche? It's basically a on steroids GT3 of some description, but of course it's a GT1, so that was a surprise. And actually, talking about the gearbox on the F1, another thing that I've always found a bit tricky is that selection, and especially when you go from second to third or even fourth to fifth, you're worried that you might select the wrong gear, and it's always a sort of clenching your teeth moment as you go to let the clutch up and make sure that you're not going to see the revs go sky high. But that said, once you get used to it, of course you can drive it fast, but it's not as easy as the GT1 is to drive fast. Then there's the CLK. And the CLK is everything that I always thought it was. It's what I've always will think it is, and it's outrageous. It's just the car that's an absolute occasion. Everything about it. From the moment you open the doors and you try and slide in through that difficult gap, and it's a technique, and you're looking around making sure that no one's sort of seen you getting in awkwardly, and if you've got the technique you can almost style it out. And it's surprisingly, it's got really supple, easy, not too firm ride. I think the gearbox is great. I mean, it's sometimes you do change gear at high speed and think, is it in the next gear? But once you're used to it, you understand it. It's just a different sensation. Instead of using your arm, you're using your fingers to go up and down, and you've got to remember to use the clutch, because we're so used these days to pulling a lever and it does everything for you. But that engine and the chassis and everything about it doesn't feel like a 1,440 kilo car. It feels the same weight as the other two. So yeah, absolute occasion. Car for the track and going fast and making the most out of it. And I expect that's probably why we saw more customer car GT1s, because these were always works cars, apart from the second season when they let some works cars become customer cars. But effectively, the CLK GTR was always a works car. GT1, we saw customer cars. It's the track car. And then this is the road car. So what have we summarised here? Well, quite simply, this is the car that was built to be a road car. It's the best road car and it's the best all-round car. You've just got to look at the size of the tyres to remember why it rides so well and why we enjoy it so much. The GT1 is the best car to take to the track and to go round the track with. It's not so much an occasion in terms of the noise and the thrill and the emotion, but it's very much a Porsche. And then the CLK is an out-and-out, rule-bending race car that's pure, that's absolutely a homologation special. And let's not forget, that is a 993 shell underneath. But yes, the summary is they're all very different. I'd love to have every single one, but if I could only have one, it's the F1. It's got to be the F1. And it doesn't really make sense in terms of everything that I've just been through as to why it would be just the F1. And isn't it rare that the most expensive, the finest, is the car, or not necessarily the car, when we think about other products and items we can buy in life? Usually the most expensive is not necessarily the best all-rounder and does everything. It's usually the most expensive because of its attributes or its design or the materials or whatever it may be, especially when we think about jewellery and watches. It's not necessarily the watch you can wear every day. But here we are, the car that is pretty much double the cost of the next one along. And it's the car that you would be happy to do the most with. Take to the track, drive to the south of France, listen to your stereo in, make the best noise. And that's why they're so sought after, and that's why it probably is the greatest car of all time.